Chapter 20. The manor house was a fortress of heavy gray stone with large glass windows and a collection of mismatched architecture. From what I could tell, it had begun its life as an old Norman castle which had been updated and added onto by subsequent generations, with each addition being constructed according to the architectural style of the time. The manor sprawled across the landscape more than it flowed, but it did so in a manner which spoke to the wealth and the influence of the family who owned it. The surrounding gardens of the estate were extensive, streaming out from the manor like a giant flower-laden river, broken only where it butted up against the surrounding pristine woods. In the back of the mansion, the garden merged into a meadow, whose center held an enormous man-made pond, filled at its surface with waterfowl of every imaginable type. It was certainly a sight to behold. I imagined, were I to walk all day, I would be hard-pressed to cover the whole of the family's grounds. It was a challenge I would have enjoyed attempting, were we not on our mission against the forces of evil. As we stopped in front of the manor's giant double stairway, Magistrate Peavy and Constable Lestrand wasted no time exiting the carriage to begin their ascent of the mammoth stone stairs, leaving the rest of us to wait for their cue. Hiram was deeply irritated and spent most of his time walking angrily back and forth, muttering about this being an outrage and an abuse of justice. Charles was more relaxed in his approach to the situation, taking advantage of the time to admire and enjoy the beautiful scenery. Sir Happy and I began the difficult task of evaluating the situation and discussing the peculiarities of our new acquaintances. "I do not trust them," began Sir Happy. "Neither of them. They are hiding something. I can feel it." "I feel certain you are correct, my friend, but I find it difficult to put my paw upon it," I replied. I found Peavy's attention to me throughout our ride here very peculiar and not the least bit genuine. Sir Happy laughed. "Ha ha ha! I must say, Marmee, you put the situation to rights with your response. Had you not done so, I might have smacked him myself, just out of pity for you. I will say Charles was brilliant to indicate what he did about my judge of character. Lestrand had, for an instant, fear response. I could smell the stink of it in the air. Such a reaction only makes sense if he has something to hide. There is more to these two men than meets the eye. I would be willing to wager they are involved in this mess somehow, but as to the extent, I cannot possibly say." It was quite some time before we heard anything from inside the manor, and I could see it was increasing Hiram's level of irritability. His pacing became more pronounced and his turns more exaggerated as he verbally railed at the inconvenience of the situation. Even Charles stopped his nature walk to offer an ear to our aggravated friend. "I do not believe this," Hiram exclaimed once he realized he had all of our attention. "They are deliberately doing the very thing I warned them not to do. We have been standing out here for more than half an hour, with no word from inside, forced to wait with the horses, while they stand inside, helping the criminals hide their guilt. It is shameful." I tried to reassure Hiram by rubbing against his leg, a gesture which had always worked in the past to ease the heart of my sweet Annie. The only effect it had in this particular case was to cause Hiram to lose his footing and go stumbling toward the boxwood hedge which lined the drive. He said a surprisingly colorful word, and then glared in my direction, as though I had done it on purpose. I did the only sensible thing and hid behind Sir Happy. Of course, Hiram immediately felt guilty and was in the process of offering me an apology when the great front door opened and we found ourselves being beckoned from above by Magistrate Peavy, indicating it was safe for us to begin our inquiry. "I have announced your arrival to the household, and you may now proceed with your investigation. Unfortunately, the
elder Lord Pierpont is away, but the younger Lord Pierpont is ready to receive you,"
he said with a satisfied smile. Hiram was very quick to rush up the stairs, with the rest of us promptly in tow. Only Sir Happy lingered behind, sniffing the air as though he were hunting a scent.
"Something is wrong," he announced with a bark. "I can smell it in the air."
Hiram and Charles were already in the entryway of the grand house, but both stopped in their tracks when they heard Sir Happy's alarm. Peavy looked incredibly uncomfortable just then, and very quickly stepped in front of them to prevent them from descending the stairs.
"Whatever is the matter, we should not keep the young lord waiting. After all, Inspector Farley, you yourself said you wanted no delays, so let us be about your business."
The magistrate was insistent, even going so far as to place his hand upon Hiram's arm to stop our friend in his tracks when it appeared as though Hiram would return back down the stairs after Sir Happy. Hiram glared at Peavy and said in a menacing voice,
"Unhand me, sir, or you will find yourself in a most unhappy state. Sir Happy says there is a problem, and I shall find out what it is."
Both Hiram and Charles pushed past the man, leaving him to sputter and protest, but to no avail. Sir Happy's bark very quickly transformed from an alarm into something more frantic, and raced down the few remaining steps of the giant stone stairway, as though in pursuit of some unseen prey. Just then I heard the sound of horse hooves in full gallop coming from the side of the manor. By the time I reached Sir Happy's side, we were being passed by a man on horseback who was racing away from the manor back in the direction of our carriage. Sir Happy was beside himself with hysteria.
"He is getting away,"
he cried, running in the direction of the disappearing rider.
"We will lose the trail if we do not hurry."
It was madness to attempt to outrun a horse, but my friend was determined to try. I feared for his physical safety, knowing he would run until he dropped dead from exhaustion. Sir Happy was halfway down the drive before I had time to speak my first word of warning, but he seemed bent on ignoring me. By some miracle, Hiram managed to break through the single-minded pursuit by yelling,
"Sir Happy, there's a better way. Quickly, my friend."
Hiram was standing next to the carriage, waiting for Sir Happy to join him. The little dog made a quick detour and leapt into Hiram's waiting arms. Without a word, the man swooped them both into the driver's seat of the carriage, and with a commanding "Hee-yah!" and a powerful flick of the reins, they were off, hurtling in the direction of the galloping horse. Charles and I could do nothing but stare after the two of them, uncertain as to why we had been suddenly abandoned. As we watched the carriage turn into the woods, I could swear I saw a look of sheer delight go across Sir Happy's face as the wind whipped his long ears behind him. Charles and I stood there for a while, gazing in the direction where the carriage had disappeared. With a deep sigh, Charles looked at me and said, "I guess, Mommy, old boy, there's not much else for us to do but go inside and wait for our carriage-stealing friends to return." Charles walked back to where Peavy stood sweating, puffing from his exertions on the stairs. The poor man had apparently tried his best to catch up with us when Sir Happy first gave his cry of alarm, but had only managed to exhaust himself in the process. Clapping the corpulent man soundly on the shoulders, Charles very cheerfully said, "Come, Peavy, and let us go meet this young lord of yours." Still trying to catch his breath, Peavy very slowly ushered us back up the stairs and into the grand hall. Since I was neither a direct participant in the carriage chase nor in the events which followed it, I must convey that part of the adventure by merging the second-hand accounts of Hiram and Sir Happy into one single narrative. A narrative whose accuracy need not be questioned based on the honorable characters of both souls involved. Hiram and Sir Happy had indeed found themselves involved in a most exhilarating chase. For Sir Happy, who loved to feel the rushing air on his face, riding in the open driver's seat with the horses running at full speed in furious pursuit of the ne'er-do-well, was like a dream come true. My dear friend later commented to me that the whole experience was a little slice of heaven. I feel certain, were he given the chance to repeat it, he would most happily welcome the opportunity to do so. One would have thought the thunderous sound of Hiram and Sir Happy's pursuing carriage would have caught the attention of the fleeing rider, but whether from self-absorption or perhaps poor hearing, the rider seemed completely unaware he was being followed. Whatever the circumstance, it offered Hiram and Sir Happy a distinct advantage in their pursuit, assuming their transportation did not fail before they could make their capture. There was a very real threat to the carriage horses losing their strength before the mysterious rider reached his destination. The poor creatures were already beginning to slacken their pace after having galloped all morning at a near full run. There had been no time to recuperate from their earlier exertions before being expected to keep pace with a fresh horse, carrying only the weight of a single man. Our horses were beset by weariness, and Hiram could tell. There was little else he could do but hope and pray the chase would reach its conclusion, and soon. While Hiram shifted his attention to the failing condition of his own horses, the rider made an abrupt turn to the right, off the main road and down a hidden pathway. The sudden disappearance of the rider caused Hiram enough alarm that he brought the exhausted horses to a complete halt, fearing the man was utterly lost to them. Thankfully, Sir Happy's attention had not wavered during the pursuit, and he was able, with some effort, to reveal the location of the obscured path. The dust trail left behind by the horses' hooves helped verify the direction the rider had taken. It took some fancy maneuvering on the part of Hiram and the horses, but between the lot of them, the carriage was soon traveling down the narrow path. It was hard going for them because the lane was so narrow and unaccustomed to the passage of a vehicle of any significant size. It was barely wide enough to accommodate a single rider, without the rider or horse being lashed severely by the surrounding foliage. Hiram and Sir Happy were completely unprotected in the open front of the carriage, and both came away from the incident with a number of nasty-looking scratches and welts sustained during their passage. It was not just the foliage which offered a challenge to the would-be pursuers. The terrain itself demanded a slower pace, which irritated Hiram exceedingly. But there was nothing which could be done to change their present circumstances. All they could do was follow blindly along the path and hope the way opened up to a more welcoming terrain. For Hiram, it was unbearable. Sir Happy, on the other hand, was not the least bit concerned, knowing full well were the situation to require it, he would be more than able to track the rider and his horse on foot. As long as the weather held to a sunny disposition, the scent of the two would remain for some time. Sir Happy was a relentless tracker, and he would not be denied his targets. I cannot be sure how long they remained upon this overgrown path. Hiram said it felt like an eternity, while Sir Happy reflected upon the time as being relatively short. Whatever the reality of the occasion, the narrow road eventually emptied out into a vast stretch of land which contained in its center a series of buildings and walled arenas. As the carriage approached the first of the outer buildings, Hiram and Sir Happy could hear the sound of numerous dogs barking. The most atrocious smell of animal waste began to emanate from the buildings. The stink of old and rotting feces was so overpowering it caused Hiram to choke on the noxious fumes.
My God!
Exclaimed Hiram, covering his mouth and nose with his handkerchief.
It is the most putrid stench I have ever experienced in my life.
Even Sir Happy was forced at times to breathe through his mouth because the smell was so offensive to his sensitive sinuses. no doubt in either of their minds this was an active kennel, but one kept under the most deplorable conditions. From the sound of the cacophony coming from the area ahead, it was easy to estimate there were dozens of dogs kept within the confines of the buildings, and if the smell was any indication, the grounds had not been cleaned in years.
Certainly this cannot be the destination of our rider, said Hiram. I cannot imagine him risking capture for this.
At the time, it seemed unbelievable even to Sir Happy that Magistrate Peavy and Lestrade would conspire with the Pierreponts to create such subterfuge at the manor just to enable someone to escape to come to this dreadful place and risk its detection. It would have been far easier and a bit more practical to keep this part of the grounds hidden until we had left, especially since the side road which led here was undetectable from the main road. It begged the question, what was so critical about this place, and why was the rider so bent on coming here? Hiram was preparing to make a wide circle around the buildings when he noticed the horse belonging to the mysterious rider. It was tethered to a large shack connected to one of the walled arenas.
What do we have here? Asked Hiram. Apparently this was his destination after all, but I wonder what brought him here in the first place.
Sir Happy was at an extreme disadvantage because he had no real way of communicating his ideas to our friend. The gulf between man and beast, at least as far as communication was concerned, was too great to overcome. After all, Hiram had only just learned Sir Happy had anything to say. With as unlikely as the destination first appeared, Sir Happy knew the kennel was of great importance, and he suspected the rider came to either hide evidence or destroy it. It was imperative they find the man before it was too late. Hiram, sensing Sir Happy's agitation, immediately put Sir Happy on the ground, enabling him to use his incredible tracking skills to locate the best path. Rather than going in the direction of the shack where the horse was tethered, as Hiram had expected him to do, Sir Happy turned in the direction of the largest building, where most of the barking was coming from. With each step, he became more certain of his prey.
This way, Hiram, Sir Happy barked at his companion. We have him now.
In his haste, the rider had unwittingly left the building door ajar. The fecal smell was strongest here. Neither one could stomach the idea of walking into the foul-smelling building, but since the perpetrator had obviously gone inside, there was no way for them to avoid the inevitable. Hiram looked down at his four-footed friend and said,
Sir Happy, it appears as though your nose has made the choice for us. With as much as I would love to avoid walking into this disgusting place, we cannot turn back now.
Hiram opened the door as wide as it would go.
Perhaps, he said, we can air the place out a bit while we conduct our search. A little fresh air cannot hurt, at any rate.
The sound of gunshots shattered the air. It was coming from the far end of the building. Sir Happy bolted in the direction of the shots, all the while calling over his shoulder.
Quickly, Hiram, we may already be too late.
Sir Happy feared their hesitation would be the case's undoing. Thankfully, it did not take them long to reach the source of the shots, but what a vision they were greeted with when they arrived at the final destination. A gentleman of middle age was standing ankle-deep in muck, holding a revolver, and systematically shooting every dog in every cage before him. His accuracy was lethal, his methods cold and calculating. At first, Hiram and Sir Happy were paralyzed by what they saw, as one dog after another was murdered in cold blood. It was not until the man began reloading his weapon that they were able to move and intervene. Hiram lunged for the gun, while Sir Happy went straight for the man's leg. Without hesitation and without thought, my friends were willing to make whatever sacrifice was necessary to save the lives of these caged creatures. It was a noble battle indeed, as both man and beast struggled to preserve God's most precious gift to his creation, life. It is
Oh,
it is written, no greater love hath a man than to give his life for a friend. How much more precious would it be in the eyes of God to give one's life for a stranger? It was a battle worth waging, and one Sir Happy was born to engage in. After all, once a Dachshund takes hold of their enemy, they never let go, and Sir Happy had no intention of releasing this man before the combat was done. He was determined to hang on until either the man surrendered or one or both of them lay dead. Dachshunds are known for their tenacity, but Sir Happy's resolve went far beyond the standard for this breed. To be completely equitable to my friends and give credit where credit was due, Hiram was just as tenacious in his struggle for the revolver, and he had no intention of giving up his parts of the fight either. It was not easy for my friends, even with their apparent advantage in numbers. The stranger was disinclined to surrender, and had Hiram not been as big and as strong as he was, Hiram and Sir Happy might have shared the fate of the unfortunate dogs they could not save. The tide of the battle finally began to turn in their favor the moment Hiram ripped the revolver out the stranger's hands. The two men and the feisty little dog had tumbled through years' worth of animal waste and old rotted hay until finally Hiram managed to land a powerful blow to the side of the stranger's face, stunning him long enough to gain control of the revolver and use it as a deterrent. "Stop!" yelled Hiram as he held the barrel of the revolver a mere paw's width from the man's nose. "Move again, sir, and your family will be hard-pressed to identify your body." The stranger's face blanched for just a moment, but very quickly filled with color as shock was replaced by rage. "How dare you threaten me?" the man exclaimed as his face transformed through ever-deepening shades of red. "Do you know who I am? I am the lord of this land, and I could have you shot for such an outrage as this. Who are you, and what right do you have to attack me on my own lands?" "Well, well, Sir Happy," Hiram said, never taking his eyes off of the man, even for the briefest moment. "It would appear as though we finally have the pleasure of meeting the elder Lord Pierrepont." Addressing the man directly, Hiram said, "I have a feeling you know exactly who I am, but for courtesy's sake, I shall introduce us properly. I am Inspector Hiram Farley from Scotland Yard, and this is the great canine detective, Sir Happy. We bring with us the full authority of the courts to search your estate and all surrounding lands, which includes these kennels." "For what purpose?" Lord Pierrepont demanded. "For the purpose of connecting you or someone at this estate to a series of vicious attacks on several citizens, including a very dear friend of mine, Dr. Stephen Hanover," replied Hiram. "We also have reason to believe the same person or persons are connected with the malicious murder of one Jessup McGibbons." At the mention of Stephen Hanover, a glimmer of some emotion flashed across Lord Pierrepont's face, but he was a man accustomed to great control over his feelings. Any betrayal of his emotions was quickly restrained, and so it made it impossible to tell exactly what it was he had felt in that split second. Shock, dismay, fear, guilt? There was no way to know at the time, but one thing was certain. Lord Pierrepont did not like Hiram or his reason for being there. "What a preposterous accusation!" Lord Pierrepont spat back. "To think I, or anyone I am acquainted with, would have anything to do with any sort of attacks or murder is madness, and the idea the courts would support such an accusation against me is even more unbelievable. Where is your proof?" "That is what I am here to collect. Explain to me, Lord Pierrepont, why you were murdering these dogs in cold blood," Hiram demanded. "I owe you no explanation for my actions," Pierrepont said defiantly. Hiram smirked as he said,
Under the circumstances, sir, you do.
A look of deepest disgust went across Lord Pierrepont's face. Before I answer you, would you be so kind as to call off your beast? His teeth have sunk into my flesh. Lord Pierrepont shook his leg violently as he said it, but could not manage to dislodge Sir Happy from his hold.
Oh my God.
Hiram gave the elder Pierrepont a look of equal abhorrence as he replied,
He is not my beast, and he will let go when he feels good and ready to do so.
Sir Happy gave it several long minutes before relinquishing his hold on the gentleman's leg to communicate he had done so by his own will and not because he had been given a command to release. He snorted his feelings of immense revulsion for the grand lord, but stood ready to regain his hold on Lord Pierrepont's leg if he attempted to escape. With Lord Pierrepont now completely charge of his own person, although still under the watchful eye of Hiram, who continued to hold his confiscated revolver in a now relaxed but ready hand, Hiram again demanded Lord Pierrepont explain himself. The gentleman, such as he was, shook with outrage of being treated so abominably. Lord Pierrepont did, however, recognize he had to offer some semblance of an explanation for killing the dogs. He stood there in silent discomfort, searching for some justification for his actions. Lord Pierrepont cleared his throat as he began, saying, It was brought to my attention today that we had several suspected cases of hydrophobia in the kennels. Considering the contagious nature of the disease, I decided the best course of action under the circumstances would be to humanely dispatch any animals which might have been exposed to help prevent the spread of such a terrible disorder. I felt I had no choice but to act quickly. I am sure a man of action, such as yourself, could understand such an extreme, although perhaps foolhardy move. One cannot be too careful when dealing with deadly hydrophobia. I had my interests to protect. Upon initial consideration, the argument might appear to be a sound one. Hydrophobia was indeed a terrible disease, one which was most certainly fatal. If Lord Pierrepont was telling the truth about the reasons for his heinous act, his interests, as he put it, would extend far beyond the dogs in his kennel. Any person who came in contact with an infected animal would run the risk of being infected as well. One aspect of the infection which made it particularly alarming was its ability to be transmitted from animals to humans. Known as madness fever, once symptoms began to develop, there was no cure, and the patient always died an excruciating death. The only treatment for an infected animal was a humane death, followed by the immediate incineration of the body. If an animal, or person for that matter, were only suspected of being infected with hydrophobia, protocol would dictate immediate quarantine of the animal to monitor behavior and potential symptoms. Immediate destruction of the animal would actually prove unwise, since hydrophobia has a relatively long incubation period, and since other, less lethal illnesses can mimic the onset of hydrophobia. A quarantine of any infected individuals would be essential to make a proper diagnosis of the disease. Destroying the animals prematurely would have been an unnecessary and irresponsible measure, considering no real diagnosis had been made. Besides, if there was a chance of there being a mass outbreak of hydrophobia, the owner of the infected animals would be obligated by law to report the possible outbreak and contact the appropriate authorities for evaluation and monitoring. Knowing the requirements of the law related to a possible hydrophobia outbreak, Hiram said,
So what you're telling me, sir, is a doctor of veterinary medicine diagnosed at least one of your dogs with hydrophobia, and made the recommendation all of your dogs be destroyed. Is that right?
Well, no, not exactly, Lord Pierrepont said, sounding more uncertain with every word. There was no formal diagnosis, but my handlers have seen cases of hydrophobia before and believe they were detecting some of the same classic symptoms in several of my dogs. Their recommendation was to destroy all of the animals which had been exposed to the infected ones as precaution to prevent the spread of the disease. I trusted their suspicions and took immediate action. Hiram looked around him.
I see no handlers here. How did you know which dogs had been infected and which ones were exposed? How could you even determine which ones to shoot without the sage advice of your highly trained handlers?
Well, when I was informed of the outbreak at the manor, they indicated which dogs they felt should be put down. Hiram laughed.
So it is an outbreak now. A moment ago you had a handful of undiagnosed, suspected cases, and within a few breaths it has blossomed into a full-blown outbreak. At this rate, we will be uncomfortably close to a pandemic within a matter of hours.
Lord Pierrepont scowled at Hiram. I do not think I like your tone, sir. Hiram glared back at him as he said,
Be that as it may, you will answer for your actions, sir, and we will see if there is any validity to your claims. It just so happens I brought a doctor of veterinary medicine with me, and we shall have him examine your dogs for any evidence of hydrophobia. If I were you, I would pray he find some.
Lord Pierrepont blanched with the reference to Charles, although at the time Charles had not yet finished his training or received the official title. The mere mention of there being a veterinary doctor on the premises caused Lord Pierrepont's confidence to show signs of weakening, as he said, As I said before, they were suspected cases, and I may have already dispatched the dogs, making it difficult to verify what I had been told. You say you brought a veterinary doctor with you? Hiram smiled at the question.
One of the best in the country, and hand-trained by the very animal doctor you sent for not long ago. You have reminded me of something. In his letters, Dr. Hanover never mentioned any signs of there being a threat of hydrophobia on your premises, nor did he voice any concerns of exposure to an infected animal. I would imagine with the time he spent here, he would have mentioned it. He also would have alerted the proper authorities to ensure the disease was not spread. He is very dependable that way.
Letters, you say, replied Lord Pierrepont, his brow crinkled under the weight of an unspoken concern. I do not recall him ever mailing any letters from the manor.
He mailed them from town when he was running errands there, Hiram replied. But I cannot see how it would matter, one way or the other, where the letters were mailed, unless, of course, you have fears regarding the contents, perhaps statements or observations which might have been less than flattering to your family or yourself.
Lord Pierrepont tried to maintain a steady yet casual gaze at Hiram as he answered, I care little what was said in his correspondences. I have nothing to hide.
We shall see,
was Hiram's only reply. While this exchange was going on, Sir Happy began to investigate his surroundings. The building they were in had the appearance of an old horse stable, but was much longer than many of the ones he had seen. One entire wall, running the full length of the building, was covered with stacks of animal cages. Sir Happy lost count at 50, but from what he could tell, every single cage was occupied by at least one dog, with many containing 2 or more. It was a horrific sight to see so many animals stacked like storage boxes in a warehouse. The excrement from the top cages oozed down onto the lower ones, covering the very bottom animals in a thick layer of fecal goo. Sir Happy could see signs of malnutrition and abuse, not to mention dogs with horrendous sores and severe cases of mange. It made his stomach turn to see such staggering neglect, and it filled him with the most incredible sense of rage at the callousness of it all. There was no pity in this place. No evidence of compassion or sympathy had ever been administered to the inhabitants of this foul building of iniquity and pain. I had always believed in my younger years, no matter how disreputable, lowly, or repugnant a foul soul might be, there had to be some glimmer of goodness, or at least a tiny, untainted spark of conscience, which could penetrate the polluted heart and give the evil doer pause to consider the repercussions of his or her misdeeds. I hoped, more than I believed, there was something basically good in all mankind. A noble spark of humanity could rise from the ashes of even the blackest heart, like the mythical phoenix, and transform the very nature of a man before it was too late. What I have discovered throughout my travels is, as with many myths, there is but a glimmer of truth behind this conviction, and though I would like to believe everyone would look upon the horrors of this so-called kennel and find them abhorrent, there would be those black-hearted souls who would defend or even applaud the conditions and activities perpetrated here. Though it gives me great discomfort to admit it, I have come to the conclusion evil does exist, and it will continue to exist and mingle itself with the rest of humanity, as long as corruption and exploitation remain unchecked. It is the duty of every soul who values goodness and seeks to battle the dark monsters of our inner selves to stand against such evil when it rears its blighted face, to do battle with our darker nature in all its forms. Such conflicts on behalf of decency cannot help but make this world a better, nobler place to make our home. Unfortunately, we too often set aside the very idea of waging such wars against the evils of the world and leave such noble pursuits to others deemed more suited to the task. As my friend, Sir Happy, absorbed the full measure of evil cruelty and callousness of this awful place, I know he was filled with the most overwhelming sense of horror and outrage, wanting to take action for the sake of these wretched creatures, but finding it impossible to know where to begin. As his mind and heart absorbed it all, one cage in particular drew his immediate attention. It was on the lowest level and contained a mother with her 3 pups. 2 of the pups lay so motionless, Sir Happy thought they were dead, while the third one mewed pitifully, having exhausted itself trying to suckle from milk that would not come. Upon closer examination, Sir Happy discovered the other 2 pups were still breathing, though barely. There was no water or food in the cage, and no blankets to protect the young ones from the damp, chill air. The young mother did her best to cover her little ones and protect them from the refuse dripping from above. The full measure of Sir Happy's pity was awakened for this vulnerable creature, and he found himself with an overwhelming need to help her.
"Dear lady,"
he said with the gentlest voice as he approached the cage,
"what can I do to help you?"
His nearing presence had at first brought her alarm, causing her to bare her teeth protectively.
"You shall not take them from me like the others. I won't let you,"
she snapped at the cage, giving Sir Happy quite a start. His compassion was not dampened by her less than welcoming response. In fact, he was determined to be of assistance to her.
"Please, lady,"
he said in the same gentle voice,
"I wish you no harm. I want only to help you and your little ones."
The young mother eyed him suspiciously, but her desire to save her litter finally overcame her distrust. She licked her snout, which was covered by flecks of dry saliva.
"I need water. I have had no water in days, and as a result, I can produce no milk for my little ones. They're growing weak. I need to move them someplace warm, and I need food.
One thing I must say for my dear friend Sir Happy. There is absolutely no crisis or obstacle which is too great for him to overcome, and the case of this mother was to be no exception. His keen intellect immediately began searching for a remedy. His first step was to examine the latch on the cage door in the hopes of discovering its opening mechanism. Had there been a padlock on the door, there would have been little my friend could do to secure the small family's immediate liberation. But thankfully, the situation was not so dire, nor her captors so vigilant. The cage door was fastened with a simple spring-loaded sliding latch. The spring itself had rusted away long ago, transforming the latch into a basic slide lock. With the use of his long snout and the near human-like dexterity of his paws, he was able to rotate the door lever and slide it to the side, enabling the cage door to swing freely open. A look of bewilderment came over the young mother's face as she confronted freedom for the first time in her life. I can imagine how terrifying the concept might have been for a creature who had never known anything but the cold reality of her caged world. There must have been a temptation to run as far away from the stench and misery which had been her constant companion, and leave the painful reality of what her life must have been far behind her. Whatever urges this young mother might have had when her cage door initially swung free, they were immediately overshadowed by her love and concern for her puppies. A quick look around the great room by Sir Happy revealed an old forgotten horse blanket lying in a heap in a cleaner, drier corner of the kennel. Although it was not ideal, it would suffice until more suitable accommodations could be found.
If you will allow me, dear lady, I will help you move your little ones to the blanket over there.
Whatever suspicions she may have initially harbored towards my friend were dissolved the moment her cage door swung free, and without a single word spoken, she accepted Sir Happy's help in moving her pups. The poor dear was near death herself, and so weak from a lack of food, she could barely carry her own weight. When she picked up the weakest of her little ones, however, Sir Happy noted her movements were graceful and unbelievably gentle. Sir Happy remarked later this lovely young mother had reminded him of our dear friend Lady Jasmine, as he was once again faced with a strength and beauty of character which had not been destroyed by a miserable existence. With all three pups and their mother wrapped within the relative safety of the horse blanket, Sir Happy turned his attention to finding them food and water. A loose board located at a convenient distance from the family revealed a quicker access to the outdoors, and within moments my friend was sniffing about, looking for some container or hollow spot in the ground which might have collected any recent rainwater. He found several stagnant pools and a large gooey horse trough before he finally found what he was looking for. Lying against an outer wall of one of the arenas was a discarded clay pot, which had what appeared to be potable water. It was not fresh, nor was it sweet tasting, but it was relatively clean and would not make the young dog sick. It was a precarious journey, trying to bring the container of water back to the mother without spilling its precious contents on the ground. But somehow my faithful friend managed it, offering what relief he could to an overly parched throat. While the mother rehydrated, Sir Happy went in search of food. It was very lucky for both of them that Hiram had elected to take the carriage on their merry little chase, because it still contained the basket of provisions dear Amelia had packed for our journey. Even with 3 people, 2 horses, a cat, and a dog eating from its contents, the basket was still full of delicious foods which would be perfect for the young mother and her little pups. Sir Happy made his selections and brought as much food as he could carry in one trip. One might imagine my delight at discovering one of the items chosen for her feast was none other than my own well-loved smoked kipper snacks. My most beloved cuisine had now become a life-saving provision, and I felt certain Sir Happy would no longer be able to tease me about my always having some on hand. With the young lady and her children appropriately cared for, with the best accommodations my friend had to offer, Sir Happy felt it now acceptable to ask the questions which had been plaguing him about this terrible place.
Dear lady,
He began, a little conflicted about the need to dredge up what would undoubtedly be painful memories of a life of misery.
Please,
She said,
call me Effie.
Effie, what is this place?
he asked. Effie looked around her.
These are the fighting kennels. This is where the pit dogs are born and trained. This is where they die if they are unlucky enough to live through their fights.
Do you know the man over there?
Sir Happy asked, indicating in the direction of Lord Pierrepont.
He is the beast who owns this place, and I guess you might say he is the one who owns me and my pups.
She replied. Her ears went back as she said it, cowering within the relative safety of her blanketed corner.
He is not the sort of man you want taking notice of you. I would just as soon have him forget my pups and I exist.
Sir Happy's chest expanded somewhat as he said,
I shall not allow him to hurt you, Lady Effie, not as long as there's breath in my body. He is of no consequence to us now, as my dear friend Farley has him restrained.
The look of distrust entered back into Effie's eyes as she looked at Hiram suspiciously.
I've never met a man who wasn't all feet and fists. I've no reason to trust a single one of them. I would sooner bite them than have another one touch me again.
Her soft voice was full of bitterness, a bitterness fostered and nurtured by untold years of abuse. Sir Happy's heart ached for his young mother, who had never known a single act of human kindness.
Dear Miss Effie, Sir Happy began, I cannot even begin to imagine the pain and suffering you have endured at the hands of evil men such as Lord Pierrepont, but I can promise you this, not all men are like him. There are more people in this world who would do you a kindness than are those who would cause you harm. I promise you, when this is all over, you will understand the full measure the good humans are capable of.
Effie stared deeply into Sir Happy's eyes, but could see nothing except honest sincerity.
We shall see,
She said.
You have shown me the first kindness I have ever known. I will reserve my final judgment for your sake.
It is fair,
said Sir Happy, feeling a deep sense of gratitude now that hope was being given a chance to spring anew within this young lady's heart.
We shall just have faith together. Now, if you don't mind, my dear, I have some more questions for you.
The nod of her head gave him permission to continue.
Are you familiar with the other canines in this kennel?
Some more so than others, and some more so than I would like,
Effie said.
Do you recall ever seeing any of one of them with a missing premolar in this position?
He asked, pointing with his paw to the side which corresponded to the position of the canine killer's missing tooth.
Sounds like it could be the one they call Brutus,
Effie said.
Although few of the dogs here have all their teeth, so there could be another fighter with a tooth missing in the same spot.
Tell me about this Brutus,
Sir Happy encouraged.
I have had little personal contact with them. All I can tell you is what I have heard said about him,
Effie began.
He was at one time a champion in the ring and considered the most vicious fighter there ever was. He showed no mercy to his opponents and often killed them before the fight could be broken up. That one over there,
she said, indicating in the direction of Lord Pierrepoint,
would come to the kennels to watch him practice. He was obsessed with Brutus, almost worshipping him till Brutus lost a fight to a female. It was his only defeat, but it cost the man a lot of money. He beat Brutus nearly to death for it. Brutus was never put back in the ring after it, and I never saw the great lord come back to see Brutus again.
So, Brutus is the fallen champion, and Brutus is the fallen and neglected champion now, Sir Happy said, a little disappointed to discover this Brutus was not a more promising suspect.
He's not exactly neglected,
Effie interjected. Sir Happy perked up. Whatever do you mean? He asked. Effie went on to describe the strange events which followed Brutus's defeat. Apparently, a man began coming to the kennel to see Brutus and brought with him a new handler who worked with Brutus every day. For months this went on until one day Brutus was taken away to the city.